Hello and welcome to Design Practice 2 Articulate. This online lecture will run you through some feedback with regards to the exercises completed in week 2. In specific, what we'll talk about is feedback on your interior volume drawings that you completed in class in week 2, and then the existing drawing package that you are completing at home. So now to come to some of the design and communication elements of this exercise. So I wanted to use Edwina's drawings again because I thought they were a great example of looking at how form and body can interrelate. So we can see here that Edwina has inserted a form that's quite amorphic, that it kind of extends into the double story area of the site, that it wraps around the window, and that she looks at ways that bodies might kind of interact with that form. So we can see here that it could be a means of kind of sitting. You could stand. If you were able to defy gravity, you could lie up here. Good exploration of bodily position and spatial enclosure. I wanted to look at Sarah's example here as an interesting response to the context of the site. So for me, this was interesting because I kind of read it as we've got the site here, so this kind of rectangle that's almost been crumpled and shrunk inwards. And the same thing happens in plan. So we've got this rectangle that gets crumpled and shrunk. So again, for me, that's an interesting relationship between the proposition, so your proposal, and the existing site. You can also see that Sarah has her name, the workshop title, drawing titles and scales, and a north point. This one I think is an interesting spatial exploration. It sort of looks at a long, narrow corridor, and we have a body in there, so you can see that here. We do want to think about what that space would actually be like to inhabit. So particularly when we start to design the space, I think it can be interesting to play with form and to kind of go a bit wild with it. But then we're kind of going to go, okay, would it be nice to be in a 20-meter long corridor with no openings? So you can continually kind of tick over this as you're drawing and modeling. This is, oh no, I don't have a name here, apologies, but I thought this was an interesting exploration of one volume that starts to kind of be punctured and perforated with openings. This might be an interesting way of relating to the windows on the site. It might be a way of connecting different parts of the program. Also interesting to see how those openings can be used by the human body. So here the opening becomes a place to lie down, and that could be a window seat, for example. And here we can see that outside of the volume someone can stand. This is, I think this was Maxine's. So this was an approach that I hadn't expected, but is totally valuable. So we've got one volume that's made up of kind of skeletal parts. So we can start to think here, how do you want your form to start to evolve? Do you want it to be a solid mass? Do you want it to be a solid mass that's punctured like the example before? Do you want it to be not a solid mass, but a series of kind of elemental components that kind of connect together to form one volume? And here, I may not be reading this correctly, but I think it's Gabby. Yeah, Gabby has looked at inverting the space. So we've got here, if I take a green, so rather than inserting a volume, we can see here that the negative space is filled. So if we look at the green area here, so that we're left with a volumetric enclosure. Very interesting approach. So that might be something that comes back as you start to develop the scheme. This was a nice one also. Again, less about whether whether the form is a square or a curve or organic or a triangle, more so about the way that this person has looked at the relationship to the existing windows. So here, this form clearly kind of grows like a cell outside of the existing door and window, and then does the same thing upwards in section, then lifts the floor in section. And so I start to think, okay, it could become a place to rest things. It could become a place to lie down. It could be a place to lean. It could be a place to put objects. It could be a place to inhabit. It could be a place to store. This is an interesting one to start to explore kind of bodily position and enclosure, as well as this kind of very specific relation to the openings on the existing site. And then again, this person, and apologies I don't have the name, was really successful in iterating that idea. So we started with this one idea here that we looked at in the example before. And then the idea doesn't completely change, it just evolves. So we look at the same principle. So we've got this kind of parasitic form that grows out of the window and the door. She does the same thing here, but the shape is kind of different, and it looks at kind of very open spaces and very tight spaces. So there's kind of a rhythm that you would work through if you were a person moving through this, from open to close to open to connecting to the window, connecting to the door, and moving away from those elements. And then she does the same thing here, but it becomes more of a passageway. So you kind of thread from a window into a door, into an open space. And then in section, we start to create two levels. So we've got one level here, we go up, and then another level over there. Great expression of iteration. Here I wanted to look at a couple of examples from a graphic perspective, so less so from the design proposition angle, more from the way that these are visually communicated. This was interesting, I think, because this person looked at line weights as well as density and pattern and dashed lines to communicate a design idea. It's quite punchy from a graphic perspective, very clear to read. I think it has some considerations that need to be kept in mind from a spatial perspective. So although we can inhabit this space here, in section we've got people on these elements, but in plan we see that these elements would be very, very, very narrow, almost like gymnastic balance beams to stand on. So if that's the intent, fair enough, that people kind of balance along, and that's the kind of experience that you're trying to create. But if not, remember the relationship between plan and section, and between creating spaces that you can kind of inhabit and comfortably inhabit. Again, great expression of kind of graphic language, shape, line, and composition of shape and line. Remember that we need to imagine this as an inhabitable three-dimensional form, more than just a graphic kind of collection of shapes on a page, as beautiful as that is. So as this will evolve in model, I'm really interested to see what the expression becomes. It could be that this is very much about these solid masses that are interconnected with kind of wire frames or skeletons or ribs, to create these places, as you can see here, where people can sit and look over and watch down onto this area here. Just a final reminder that we need to work in A3 format, and it doesn't matter whether that's on a piece of white A3 trace, whether it's on an A3 piece of yellow butter paper that you've cut, a piece of white butcher's paper that you've cut, I don't mind, but we do want to make sure that these are usable for the week 4 assessment, and that means they need to be in A3 format. So remembering that in week 4, we're actually going to have 9 A3 panels. So if you can work in A3 in class, you can avoid having to redo these at home in preparation for week 4. And just a reminder that process work is a component of your week 4 assessment task. So we would like you to start compiling all of your process work and definitely keeping it along the way. So just a couple examples to go through here. We've got one where this person is really looking at how they might start to set up their drawing so that they're using their section to inform an upper and lower floor plan and vice versa. So we can see here drafting lines that indicate here we've got the upper area of the section that informs here the upper floor plan, and here the lower area of the section that informs the lower floor plan. It's quite a useful trick for kind of redrawing and connecting your drawings. And here we've got another process sketch. This person was starting, this is Marty, I think, who was starting to look at how you might start to break up the space and furnish it. And also it's setting up lines, so I might go in red here, lines so that he could figure out the levels that he was working with in relation to the height of a person. So this is all the kind of stuff that you might include in your process work as evidence of inquiry and experimentation. Again, drawing this back to the assessment criteria. And so we'll end just on a little recap of the relevance of this exercise to the project. I know a few people were kind of like, why are we doing this? Why can't I just start designing the apartment? So the first reason that we do an exercise like this is really just to break down the project into a series of parts so that you're not dealing with everything in one hit. The first is to get you familiar with spatial enclosure in terms of 20 square meters, right? So what kind of form might 20 square meters take? How might this form work in the site? And how might it start to enclose a body? So we're really starting to get you very familiar with scale and with volume, volumetric creation. The second component is that placing a 20 square meter volume into the site inherently allows you to deal with both positive and negative space. So what happens when you put this 20 square meter volume into the site? How much is left over? And in turn, how might you relate this to the micro apartment and then to the use of the rest of the space for the grocer? And finally, anthropometric. So really this looks at dimensions, human dimensions and bodily dimensions. And in this course, in the relationship between space, the human body and human psyche. And finally, these tasks are a way of getting you to link your research and the conceptual ideas that come from that into space making. So for me, a concept or a design idea is really only of use if it actually helps you to make design decisions, so to design a space. So hopefully each week you can start to reflect on your research and use that to inform the design decisions that you make. Thanks.